A 6-year-old girl ran up to the billionaire at his own wedding, and whispered a truth that blew the entire ceremony apart. Harrison Blake had imagined many versions of his wedding day, but none of them included a sudden child's voice slicing through the music like a blade. The ballroom glowed under crystal chandeliers, white roses hung in delicate arches above the aisle, and every guest looked polished enough to belong in a magazine photograph. Harrison himself stood tall in a deep blue suit that contrasted sharply with his eyes, his posture perfectly composed despite the whirlwind of emotion inside him. His bride, Crystal, stood beside him in a gown so white it seemed to radiate its own light. She smiled with a confidence that said she believed everything unfolding was entirely under her control. The officiant began speaking, the orchestra played a soft crescendo, and everyone settled into the moment with dreamy anticipation, until soft, rapid footsteps interrupted the rhythm. A small girl in a bright red dress broke through the rows of chairs, her blonde hair bouncing, her blue eyes wide with a mix of fear and desperate courage. For a moment people only blinked at her, confused about who she was or why she was running toward the groom. Her mother worked as a housekeeper in the hotel, and Lily herself was usually invisible to everyone except Harrison, who always made a point to smile at the little girl whenever he saw her. But now she looked nothing like the shy child who peeked from behind her mother's skirt on cleaning days. She grabbed Harrison by the wrist with trembling fingers, breathless, too urgent to care that hundreds of eyes were on her. The music stumbled into a confused halt as Lily lifted her face to him, her voice shaking yet loud enough to echo through the hall. "I saw her kissing someone else," she blurted, and the silence cracked instantly. "Don't marry her. She's lying to you." The words hit the air like broken glass. Guests gasped, Crystal's perfect smile froze, and the officiant dropped his book with a thud. Harrison stared at Lily, unable to speak for a moment, not because he believed her entirely, but because he felt something inside him shift, the kind of instinctive warning he had ignored too many times in his life. Crystal's expression snapped into something sharp and nervous before she smoothed it over with an overly bright laugh. She stepped forward, towering over the small girl, and declared that this was absurd, that the child was confused, that maybe someone had put such nonsense into her head. But Lily didn't shrink. She held on to Harrison's wrist as if it were the only anchor she had, and her voice, though quieter now, held unwavering certainty. "I'm telling the truth. I saw it." People murmured, heads turning sharply toward Crystal. Harrison felt the weight of every doubt he had dismissed lately, the unexplained late-night outings, the phone she guarded like a secret vault, the strain behind her smiles whenever he asked harmless questions. His heart didn't shatter, but it tightened, heavy with the realization that something, somewhere, had been wrong long before this moment. He crouched down to meet Lily's eyes, and for a moment the world shrank to just the two of them. Her small face was pale, but her gaze stayed steady, full of a sincerity that struck him harder than anything Crystal had said in months. When he finally straightened and looked back at his bride, he saw something he had never seen before: panic. She attempted another laugh, tried to brush off the accusation as a childish fantasy, but her voice wavered under the pressure. Harrison stepped away from her. The crowd held its breath. The perfect wedding, the flawless image, the carefully planned celebration, all of it hung suspended, trembling on a single truth spoken by a child who had nothing to gain by lying. And for the first time since he slipped the engagement ring onto Crystal's finger, Harrison wondered if this entire day had been built on a foundation that was never real to begin with. Harrison didn't remember making the decision to walk Crystal out of the ballroom. His body moved with a calmness that didn't match the storm tearing through him inside. As soon as the doors shut behind them and the noise of shocked whispers faded, the room around them felt smaller, the air heavier, and Crystal's perfect posture finally faltered. She tried to reach for his arm, but he stepped just slightly out of her touch, not dramatically, but enough to make her freeze. He stared at her in the dim light of the private suite, the glow of chandeliers from the hall reflecting off her beaded dress in cold, fractured patterns, and he realized he had no idea who he was really engaged to. Crystal started first, her voice too quick, too polished, falling into a practiced tone that sounded more like a performance than a confession. She insisted that Lily must have misunderstood something, that maybe she had seen an innocent moment out of context, that the girl was probably confused or repeating something she overheard. Her explanations came in a rapid rush, but none of them felt grounded, and each word she spoke seemed to tighten the weight forming in Harrison's chest. He asked one question, simple, direct, steady enough to surprise even himself. "Did you kiss someone else?" Crystal swallowed hard. Her eyes darted away from his in a fraction of a second, tiny but telling. Her silence lasted too long, and when she finally whispered, "It wasn't what it looked like," Harrison felt a clarity settle over him like a closing door. She tried to spin the story: stress, pressure, a moment of weakness, a harmless slip. She reached for him again, as if she could smooth the truth away with a touch. But he took another step back, and that distance made her voice crack with frustration. The more she spoke, the clearer it became that she wasn't apologizing, she was negotiating, trying to salvage an image, a future, a financial alliance. And the worst part was the sudden realization that she wasn't fighting for him. She was fighting for what marrying him would give her. Harrison felt something inside him break in a quiet, irreversible way. He had built an entire future in his mind with her, a home, a family, a sense of belonging he had been too proud to admit he wanted. And in the span of minutes, that future dissolved like smoke. But he didn't shout. He didn't accuse. He simply exhaled, long and tired, as if releasing months of doubt he had suppressed without knowing it. He left her there, stunned and furious, and stepped back into the ballroom. The guests turned toward him with a mixture of curiosity and dread. Reporters instinctively quieted, sensing the gravity of whatever he was about to say. Lily was standing near her mother, small and trembling, clutching the hem of her red dress as if bracing for punishment. The entire room seemed to hold its breath as Harrison walked past rows of chairs and stopped near the altar where only heartbreak waited. He lifted the microphone, and his voice, though soft, cut through the silence effortlessly. "The wedding is cancelled." A collective gasp rippled through the hall. Crystal's friends exchanged terrified looks. Sponsors and investors whispered urgently. But Harrison didn't care about any of that anymore. He wasn't protecting an image. He wasn't preserving a brand. He was reclaiming his truth. Then he turned toward Lily. The little girl didn't speak, didn't move. She stood stiffly beside her mother, her bright blue eyes full of fear, not fear of him, but fear that she had ruined everything, that she had stepped into a world where children were supposed to stay silent and invisible. Harrison felt a deep swell of emotion he didn't expect. He walked toward her, ignoring the stares, ignoring the tension, ignoring the devastation behind him. Lily's mother tried to step forward, apologizing in a rush, saying her daughter didn't mean to cause trouble. But Harrison lifted a hand gently, silencing her with quiet respect. He knelt in front of Lily so the two of them were eye to eye. The girl's eyes shimmered with the fear that she had done something terribly wrong, and her small fingers twisted into the fabric of her dress. "Lily," he said softly, "thank you." The word seemed to stun her. She blinked, confused, almost disbelieving. "You told the truth," he continued, his voice warm but carrying the weight of something much deeper. "You were brave when no one else was." Lily's chin quivered as she whispered, "I didn't want to hurt you. I just didn't want you to be sad later." Harrison felt that sentence hit him harder than anything Crystal had said. This was a 6-year-old child who had chosen honesty over fear, compassion over silence, courage over comfort. And she had done it without expecting anything in return. He placed a steady hand on her small shoulder, grounding her fears. Around them, whispers softened, judgment faded, and for the first time that day, something true, small but powerful, shone through the chaos. Lily saved him, not just from a lie, but from a future built on deception. And as he stood back up with a calmness that surprised even him, he realized that everything in his life had just changed, not because it fell apart, but because one small voice had finally shattered the illusion he had been too blinded to see. Harrison didn't sleep that night. After the guests dispersed, after the decorations were torn down, after Crystal was escorted out of the hotel screaming accusations at everyone except herself, he found himself alone in the private penthouse suite reserved for the groom. The silence felt strangely loud, crashing through him louder than the wedding music that had played only hours earlier. He sat by the window overlooking the city, the lights below flickering like distant stars, and tried to understand how a single moment, a child's trembling voice, had peeled back the entire facade of his life. His thoughts kept circling around Lily, the tiny girl in the red dress who had stood in front of hundreds of adults and spoken the truth with a bravery he couldn't ignore. He replayed the look in her eyes, that mix of fear and fierce determination, and realized just how much he had underestimated her courage. A child had seen what he had refused to see. And she had acted. The next morning he returned to the hotel, not because he needed to deal with the aftermath, but because something nagged at him, a sense of responsibility, of gratitude, of unfinished conversation. The staff avoided his eyes, unsure how to approach a billionaire with a shattered wedding, but Lily's mother, Anna, waited near the lobby with her daughter beside her. Anna's posture was tense, her hands twisted together as if ready to shield her child from consequences, apologies, or anger. But Lily stood calmly, staring at her shoes, clutching a folded napkin she had colored on the previous evening, unaware she was holding proof of her innocence as tightly as she held her bravery. When Harrison approached, Anna hurried forward and began apologizing again, explaining that Lily should never have interrupted, that children sometimes misinterpret what they see, that she hoped he didn't believe Lily had acted out of malice. But Harrison stopped her gently, not with force but with sincerity strong enough to quiet her without a single raised voice. He crouched down in front of Lily again. She lifted her eyes slowly, as if afraid he might regret defending her. "I meant what I said yesterday," Harrison told her. "You didn't ruin anything. You didn't cause the problem. You revealed it." Lily's eyes widened a little, still filled with the worry only a child could feel, fear of being punished for telling the truth. She whispered that she hadn't wanted to lie or hide anything, that she'd stood outside the bridal suite cleaning a dropped bouquet when she saw Crystal slip into a room with another man. She described how she'd heard laughter through the door and then saw the kiss when it opened a crack. She hadn't wanted to say anything because she was afraid Crystal would be mad, but the thought of Harrison being tricked scared her more. As she spoke, Harrison felt something in him soften, some part of him that had been clenched tight for years. She didn't speak like a child seeking attention. She spoke like someone who had carried the weight of truth overnight and finally released it now that she knew she was heard. Anna kept apologizing in between sentences, but Harrison shook his head gently each time. He wasn't angry. He was grateful, because a child had done for him what entire teams of professionals had failed to do. When they stepped aside to let a staff member pass, Lily tugged on Harrison's sleeve again. She hesitated, standing on her tiptoes as if trying to reach his height emotionally rather than physically. "Are you sad?" she asked softly. The question pierced him more deeply than any accusation from Crystal. It wasn't asked with pity but with genuine concern, with a purity that made him feel disarmed and understood. "I'm disappointed," Harrison admitted slowly. "But not in you. And not in myself either. I'm sad about what she did, but I'm also glad I found out now." Lily nodded in a small, serious way, like she understood more than her age suggested. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the napkin she'd been holding. On it was a red scribble that looked like a messy heart, drawn with a child's uneven lines. She offered it to him without explanation, as if it were simply what one gave to someone who had been hurt. Harrison felt a tightness in his throat he didn't expect. "Is this for me?" he asked. She nodded again. "It's to make you feel better. Mom says when people are sad, it helps to hold something nice." He took the drawing and folded it carefully, as though it were far more valuable than the expensive gifts guests had brought the day before. Somehow this tiny piece of napkin carried more sincerity than the entire wedding combined. As they spoke, the hotel manager approached, flustered and apologetic about the scandal, but Harrison barely heard him. His attention was on Lily and the realization growing in his mind: if she hadn't spoken, he would have married a lie. He would have tied his future to someone who saw him as a trophy, a stepping stone, a source of wealth, not a person. He told Anna he wanted to help her and Lily however he could. Anna tried to refuse, embarrassed by the offer, but Harrison insisted. He didn't do it out of guilt or charity, he did it because he knew their lives intersected for a reason he couldn't ignore anymore. Before leaving, Lily asked in a small, cautious voice, "Did I make everything bad?" Harrison lowered himself to her level again and met her eyes with complete sincerity. "No," he said quietly. "You made everything honest." The girl let out a tiny breath of relief, and in that moment Harrison realized something else: this little girl had unknowingly changed the entire course of his life. She had broken the illusion he'd been living in and given him the truth he desperately needed, even if he hadn't known it. As he watched her take her mother's hand and walk away, he understood something deeply and clearly: Lily hadn't just saved him from a bad marriage. She had awakened something inside him that had been silent for far too long, the belief that truth, no matter how small the messenger, had the power to change everything. Harrison returned to his penthouse later that day expecting the quiet to feel comforting, but instead the rooms felt hollow, as if the walls still echoed with vows never spoken and lies that had almost been sealed with a kiss. He walked through the space slowly, noticing details he had never seen because he had been too busy preparing for a future that no longer existed. The perfectly arranged wedding gifts, the untouched champagne on ice, and the neatly folded suit jacket he had discarded earlier all seemed to belong to another man, one who believed in illusions. He loosened his tie and sank into a chair by the window, letting the silence press against him as he replayed the events of the day. Crystal's denial, her shifting eyes, her carefully constructed lies, each memory stung with a truth he could no longer avoid. But behind all those swirling emotions stood one small, steady figure: Lily. Her bravery had anchored him through the chaos, and the thought of her sincere eyes gave him a warmth he didn't expect to feel so soon after heartbreak. As the evening deepened, he found himself unable to sit still. He needed clarity, something to ground him in the reality of his present rather than the ruins of his expectations. So he returned to the hotel again, not out of obligation, but because he felt drawn there by an instinct he didn't fully understand. When he arrived, the lobby was quieter, the bustle replaced by night staff preparing for the next day. He spotted Anna standing by the service elevator with a mop and bucket, her shoulders slumped with exhaustion, while Lily sat on a nearby bench swinging her legs and humming softly to herself as she colored on a hotel notepad. Seeing them made some of the weight in his chest ease. He approached them, and Lily's head snapped up instantly, her blue eyes widening with surprise. She hopped off the bench and walked over to him, not running this time, but approaching with a gentle focus that felt strangely adult for someone her age. Anna straightened quickly, clearly embarrassed to be caught working by the hotel's wealthiest and most influential guest, but Harrison lifted a hand to reassure her that she had done nothing wrong. Lily tilted her head slightly, studying his face with the same perceptiveness she had shown during the wedding disaster. "You look tired," she said softly, almost whispering. Harrison let out a faint laugh, surprised by her honesty. "It was a long day." She nodded as if she understood perfectly. Then she reached into the pocket of her red dress and pulled out something small, a simple hotel mint wrapped in paper. She held it out to him with both hands, as though offering something precious. "Mom says these help when someone is sad," she explained. "They're sweet. Sweet things help a little." He took the mint carefully, not because he needed it, but because the gesture felt like a lifeline pulling him out of the wreckage of the past hours. "Thank you, Lily," he said. "You've helped me more than you know." Anna stepped closer, cheeks flushed with embarrassment. "Mr. Blake, I hope she isn't bothering you. She's been talking about you all afternoon." She was so worried. She isn't bothering me, Harrison interrupted, his voice firm but gentle. Honestly, I think she's the only one who made sense today. Anna blinked at him, startled, then gave a small smile that carried both relief and gratitude. Lily, however, was already shifting her weight from one foot to another, clearly wanting to say something else but hesitant. Harrison crouched down again, and the moment he did, Lily leaned forward just slightly. Are you upset with her? Lily asked. With the lady in the white dress? Harrison didn't answer immediately. He watched Lily's expression, the concern etched into her young features, and felt something inside himself ease. I'm not upset anymore, he said slowly. I'm just letting go. She processed that carefully. Letting go is hard, she said, sounding far older than 6. It is, he agreed. But sometimes it's the right thing. Lily nodded with quiet understanding, as if she had seen enough adult pain to recognize truth when she heard it. She then reached out and gently placed her small hand on his forearm, a gesture that felt so pure and uncalculated that Harrison felt the tightness in his chest loosen again. She didn't try to fix him or console him with forced words, she simply stood there with him, anchoring him with a presence that felt unexpectedly comforting. When Anna finished cleaning the hallway and prepared to head home, Harrison walked them to the exit. He insisted on calling them a car, despite Anna's attempts to refuse. Lily held his hand lightly as they walked, her small fingers warm against his. She didn't speak much, but every few steps she looked up at him, checking if he was still okay. And each time he glanced down at her, he found himself grateful for the honesty she carried so naturally. Before they left, Lily squeezed his hand one last time and said, "You're going to be happier now." "I think so." He stared at her, stunned by how certain she sounded, and then slowly nodded. "Maybe you're right." She smiled, and the simple joy of it felt like the first real light he'd seen since the wedding shattered. As their car pulled away, Harrison stood on the curb with the mint still in his hand, realizing something profound. He had lost a relationship built on lies, but he had gained something far more meaningful, the truth, spoken by a child with a fearless heart. And that truth, as painful as it had been, was the beginning of something new, something honest, something clean, something worth rebuilding. For the first time in a very long while, Harrison felt the faintest promise of hope stirring inside him. Harrison woke the next morning feeling strangely weightless, as if some part of him had finally slipped free from a burden he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. The sunlight spilled across the room in soft columns, illuminating the remnants of what yesterday should have been, bouquets now sitting in vases like ghosts of a celebration that never happened, a discarded bow tie on the floor, and a stack of unopened congratulatory cards on the table. Yet none of it stung the way he had expected. Instead, it felt like he was looking at relics from someone else's life, someone who no longer existed. He showered slowly, dressed without much thought, and told his assistant to cancel every meeting for the next 2 days. He didn't need to be in an office pretending to strategize. He needed clarity. He needed grounding. And the only thing that had grounded him since the chaos began was a little girl with bright blue eyes who had seen the truth long before he had. Around noon he found himself driving to the modest apartment building where Lily and her mother lived. It was old but clean, with rows of flower pots lining the balconies where tenants tried to add life to the aging structure. He stood outside their door for a moment, wondering if he was intruding, wondering if the presence of someone like him, a billionaire with headlines swirling around his name, might bring them more stress than comfort. But just as he lifted his hand to knock, the door swung open and Lily stood there, holding a bowl of cereal and blinking in surprise as if she had accidentally opened the door to a dream. "You're here," she said simply, making it sound like the most natural thing in the world. Anna appeared behind her, stunned and flustered, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She began apologizing for the mess that wasn't there, insisting he didn't have to visit, insisting Lily must have bothered him somehow. But Harrison shook his head and smiled, reassuring her that he wanted to be here, that this wasn't a duty but a choice. They invited him in, and he stepped into a living room that smelled faintly of vanilla and detergent. Crayons were scattered across the coffee table, a half-finished drawing of a house with a huge sun above it lay abandoned on the couch, and a pair of tiny sneakers rested near the door. It was the kind of warmth that didn't come from wealth but from sincerity, and it struck him immediately how much more real this felt than any room filled with gold-trimmed decor or designer furniture. Lily climbed onto the couch and crossed her legs, studying him with the open curiosity children never hide. "Are you feeling better today?" she asked, as if she had been assigned the task of checking on him. "A lot better," Harrison said. "You helped with that." She brightened visibly, then scooted forward so she was perched at the edge of the cushion. "Do you want to see my drawings? I made some last night because drawing helps me think." He nodded, and she eagerly spread them out on the table. There were messy hearts, flowers, clumsy animals, and one drawing that made him pause, a tall figure in a blue suit standing beside a small girl in a red dress. The man looked sad, the girl held his hand, and above them was written in shaky letters, "It's okay." He swallowed hard, touched in a way he didn't know how to articulate. "This is beautiful, Lily." She shrugged, suddenly shy. "I wanted you to know you're not alone." Anna turned away to hide the emotion on her face, busying herself with making tea, but her shoulders trembled slightly. Harrison realized then that Lily was not just brave, she was incredibly perceptive, aware of feelings others dismissed or ignored. As they talked, Lily asked him questions adults would never dare ask. Did the wedding make him cry? Did Crystal ever make him laugh? Did he think it was his fault? Each question was guileless but piercing, forcing him to examine emotions he had shoved down in order to function. Harrison found himself answering honestly, not because he felt obligated, but because Lily's presence made lies feel unnecessary. He told her he was hurt but relieved, sad but grateful, disappointed but stronger. She listened with her chin propped on her hand, absorbing every word like a story. At one point she leaned closer and said, "Sometimes people pretend to be good because they don't want others to know they're bad. But you can always feel it here." She placed a small hand over her chest. "Your heart knows before your head does." Harrison smiled, struck by how true that was. His heart had sensed Crystal's deception long before his mind caught up, but he had chosen to ignore it. Lily, however, had acted immediately. Her heart had pushed her forward, even when her voice trembled. Then, unexpectedly, Lily climbed off the couch and retrieved a small, slightly worn teddy bear from her room. She pressed it into Harrison's hands with a seriousness he didn't understand at first. "He's the one I hug when I'm scared. You can borrow him today." The gesture hit him so deeply he had to inhale slowly to steady himself. No amount of wealth could buy the kind of compassion this child gave so freely. He held the teddy bear gently, as if it were made of something fragile and priceless. Anna watched with a mixture of shock and tenderness. "She's never given that bear to anyone before," she whispered. "I'll take good care of him," Harrison promised. Lily nodded firmly, satisfied. Before he left, Harrison told Anna that he wanted to help them, better housing, medical coverage, school support, whatever they needed. Anna tried to refuse, embarrassed, but he insisted this wasn't charity. It was gratitude. It was acknowledgement. It was the bare minimum he could do for the girl who had saved his life from an illusion. When Harrison finally stepped outside, the sun felt warmer, the air sweeter, the world clearer. He held the teddy bear carefully as he walked to his car, realizing something profound. He had spent years surrounded by people who performed kindness to gain something from him. But the truest kindness he had ever received came from a 6-year-old girl who had nothing to gain except the relief of knowing she had done the right thing. For the first time in years, Harrison felt genuinely hopeful, not because he had avoided disaster, but because something new and unexpected had begun. Something honest. Something real. Something that came from a place untouched by lies. And as he drove away, he understood with absolute certainty that Lily Harper had not just saved him from heartbreak. She had restored something inside him he thought he had lost forever: trust. Harrison returned to his office the next week, not because he felt ready but because life demanded motion even when the heart lagged behind. The building felt different now, quieter, as if the walls themselves sensed the shift in him. Some employees looked at him with sympathy, others with curiosity, but most avoided eye contact entirely, afraid that mentioning the wedding disaster would be inappropriate. Harrison didn't mind. Silence was easier to navigate than forced comfort. He carried Lily's little teddy bear in his briefcase, not for display, not for sentimentality, but as a quiet reminder of the truth that had pulled him out of deception. Whenever uncertainty crept up on him, he found himself touching the soft fabric inside the case, grounding himself in the memory of a child's earnest courage. Meetings blurred together, numbers and strategies blending into noise he barely processed. His mind wandered frequently to Lily and her mother. He thought about the way Lily had watched him with perceptive eyes far older than 6, the simplicity of her honesty, the bravery that had saved him. He realized he wanted to see them again, not to relive the past but to anchor himself in something genuine. Later that afternoon, when he finished the last necessary meeting, he found himself driving toward the school Lily attended. He parked nearby and waited discreetly as children spilled out of the building in waves of backpacks and laughter. Lily emerged with a group of classmates, waving animatedly as she talked about something with bright enthusiasm. When she saw him, she stopped mid-sentence, blinked in surprise, and then grinned so widely it warmed him more than the sunlight. She ran over with the boundless energy only a child carried, and her classmates watched curiously as she approached the expensive car and the man who looked too important to be standing there. Lily didn't care about any of that. She tugged his sleeve excitedly and said she had made something for him. She pulled out a construction paper card covered in glitter and uneven letters that read, "Happy New Day." Inside she had drawn a messy sun shining over a tall figure and a small girl holding hands. Harrison felt a tug at his heart that words couldn't quite describe. He thanked her sincerely, touched by the idea that Lily believed in new beginnings so firmly she created a holiday just for one. Anna arrived a few moments later, startled to see him but grateful he had waited for Lily. She apologized again for taking up his time, but Harrison reassured her that he was here simply because he wanted to be. He offered to drive them home so they wouldn't have to take the bus, and though Anna hesitated, Lily's hopeful expression dissolved any resistance. In the car, Lily filled the ride with stories: how she had helped a classmate with a stuck zipper, how she drew a cat that looked more like a potato, how her teacher said she had leadership qualities. Harrison laughed more freely than he had in months, realizing that Lily's presence made everything lighter. Back at their apartment, he walked them inside, helping carry a bag of groceries Anna had bought. The modest home felt like a warm pocket of peace in a world full of expectations and superficiality. Lily immediately pulled out crayons and insisted Harrison sit with her so they could draw something better than yesterday. She said art helped fix sad feelings, even when the sadness wasn't obvious anymore. Harrison joined her on the carpet, not caring that his expensive trousers might wrinkle or pick up bits of glitter. They drew together. She sketched shapes and dragons and smiling suns, while he attempted a clumsy house with a crooked roof that made her giggle uncontrollably. At one point, Lily paused her drawing, looked at him with a thoughtful expression, and asked, "Do you feel less lonely now?" The question hit him harder than he expected. Lonely was a word he rarely allowed himself to acknowledge. He had money, status, influence, and people around him constantly, but hidden beneath all of that was a hollow place he hadn't dared to examine. And somehow this small child could see straight into it. He answered honestly. Yes. A lot less lonely. She nodded with quiet satisfaction, as if solving a puzzle inside her mind. Good. Then you're getting better. The simplicity of her declaration struck him so deeply that he didn't speak for a moment. Lily didn't dwell on emotions, she named them, accepted them, and moved on with the certainty that healing was possible simply because she believed it was. Anna, watching from the kitchen, saw the subtle transformation in Harrison, the way his posture relaxed, the way his smiles came more naturally, the way the tension in his jaw faded. She made tea for all three of them, quietly grateful that her daughter had brought something unexpected and good into this man's life. Harrison, in turn, felt a profound gratitude toward them both. Not because they filled a void, but because they reminded him what sincerity felt like in a world obsessed with appearances. Before he left that evening, Lily hugged him gently, her arms wrapping around his waist. "You're stronger than yesterday," she said into his shirt, speaking with the certainty of someone who believed in her own instincts without hesitation. "Tomorrow you'll be even better." He rested a hand on her back, deeply moved by her simple wisdom. "Thank you, Lily." She stepped back and held out her pinky. "Promise you'll come back." Harrison hooked his pinky with hers, sealing the kind of promise that meant far more than any contract he had ever signed. As he walked out of the apartment and into the night, he realized something with growing clarity: he wasn't just healing. He was changing. The truth Lily had given him didn't just break something inside him, it rebuilt him from a more honest place. He had lost a life he thought he wanted. He had gained something infinitely more valuable, the beginning of a life rooted not in illusion, but in truth and warmth. Harrison's company prided itself on efficiency, precision, and order, yet the investigation that unfolded over the following months revealed a web of deception far more tangled than anyone had anticipated. After the chaos of the wedding, Harrison had assumed Crystal's betrayal ended with infidelity and emotional manipulation. But truth had a way of revealing itself in layers, and each layer peeled back something more disturbing. It began when Harrison's internal auditors flagged irregularities in financial reports, small discrepancies that had been neatly buried beneath complicated spreadsheets and misleading memos. Normally such minor inconsistencies would be dismissed as clerical errors, but Harrison's trust in his instincts, sharpened by Lily's bravery, refused to ignore the signs. He ordered a full-scale review, and what emerged shocked even his most seasoned analysts. Crystal had not acted alone. She had been working with a man she claimed was nothing during her shaky explanation months ago. He wasn't nothing, he was a corporate opportunist with a history of dismantling vulnerable companies and siphoning funds through shell organizations. Together, Crystal and her lover had plotted not only to secure Harrison's wealth through marriage but also to quietly position themselves for a takeover of his company. They had targeted weaknesses, manipulated small departments, and even coerced an accountant or two into altering figures. The scale of their scheme was chilling, but what struck Harrison most was the fact that he had almost married the woman orchestrating the entire plan. The revelation hit him in a way that went beyond betrayal. He had believed himself smart, discerning, impossible to manipulate. Yet he had been blind. If Lily hadn't stepped in, he would have walked straight into a future engineered to destroy him. The realization made him sit still for a long time, staring at the stacks of documents that detailed just how close he had come to catastrophe. And in that stillness, his thoughts drifted once more to the small girl whose honesty had saved him. Determined to uncover the full truth, Harrison assisted investigators, reviewing documents late into the night, re-examining emails he had once skimmed without suspicion, and piecing together a timeline of deceit. The more he uncovered, the colder the truth felt. Crystal had intended to stay with him long enough to seize control, then leave him financially and emotionally devastated. It wasn't just a broken engagement. It was an attempted corporate ambush. News of the investigation eventually leaked. Reporters circled the company like vultures, eager to spin the story into something scandalous. Harrison refused interviews, focusing entirely on cleaning the internal structure of the business. He fired those who had aided Crystal, restructured departments that had fallen into disarray, and personally apologized to employees who had been affected. In doing so, he regained not only control but also respect, a respect rooted not in wealth but in accountability. Yet through all the chaos, there was one steady source of peace. Every few days, Harrison visited Lily and her mother, finding comfort in the simplicity of their home and the sincerity of their interactions. Lily had a way of grounding him, pulling him out of his thoughts with her directness. One evening, as he helped her with a school project involving glitter, construction paper, and an extraordinary amount of glue, she looked up at him with her trademark seriousness. "You found the bad stuff, didn't you?" she asked, as if reading the truth off his face. "Yes," Harrison said quietly, surprised by how easily the word escaped him. "A lot of it." "More than the kissing?" she asked. "Much more." Lily considered this carefully, pressing a glitter star onto the paper. "Then I'm glad I told you. Even if it made everyone stare at me." Harrison watched her delicate fingers pat down the glitter. "You didn't just tell me about the kiss," he said softly. "You stopped something far worse." She shrugged in the way children do when they don't fully understand the weight of their actions. "My mom says people who lie always make trouble. I didn't want trouble to find you." The simplicity of her explanation stunned him. Adults complicated everything with excuses, rationalizations, and denials. Lily, on the other hand, operated from a place of pure instinct and sincerity. She saw danger and told the truth. She sensed hurt and offered comfort. She recognized loneliness and filled it without being asked. In the following weeks, the investigation reached its peak. Crystal and her accomplice were arrested and charged with fraud, corporate sabotage, and conspiracy. The public was shocked, but Harrison felt only a deep, exhausted relief. Justice was served, but what mattered most to him was that the future he nearly handed to the wrong person had been reclaimed, and all because Lily had refused to let fear silence her. When the charges became official, Harrison went to see Lily and her mother again. They were sitting in their small dining area, the smell of warm soup filling the air. Lily was drawing another picture, this one of a tall man in a suit standing triumphantly on a hill with a flag, and below him a tiny figure cheering. "You won," Lily announced proudly when she saw him. Harrison laughed softly. "It's not really winning." She frowned at him with mild frustration. "But the bad people didn't get what they wanted. That's winning." He couldn't argue with her. Children saw victories where adults saw loose ends. As they ate dinner together, Harrison felt something settle inside him, not triumph, not revenge, but peace. For the first time since the wedding disaster, he felt genuinely whole. He wasn't the same man he had been before, polished on the outside but guarded and lonely on the inside. He had been reshaped, softened in some places and strengthened in others, by the unexpected presence of one brave little girl. When he walked home that night, the city lights seemed brighter. The air felt lighter. And he realized something quietly profound: Lily hadn't just exposed a lie. She had given him back his life before someone else ruined it. And in doing so, she had become more than a child he wanted to help. She had become the compass he didn't know he needed, pointing him back toward truth, toward sincerity, and toward a future no longer built on illusion. Harrison stood outside the courthouse on the crisp morning of the sentencing hearing, feeling the weight of the last year settle into a quiet, thoughtful heaviness. Reporters swarmed the entrance like a storm surge, microphones flashing, voices overlapping as they shouted his name, hungry for a statement. But he didn't give them one. He wasn't here for spectacle. He wasn't here for vindication. He was here for closure. And he wasn't alone. Lily stood beside him in her red dress, now a size larger than the one she wore on his cancelled wedding day, with her small hand wrapped confidently around two of his fingers. Her mother, Anna, stayed close behind them, watching the commotion with worried eyes, but Lily seemed completely unfazed by the chaos surrounding them. She held a coloring book under her arm and hummed to herself, as if this morning were just another ordinary day. Inside the courtroom, Crystal sat at the defendant's table with her lawyer whispering frantically beside her. Gone was the polished bride-to-be with expensive jewelry and flawless hair. In her place sat a woman whose mask had shattered long ago, her features tight with resentment and disbelief that her plan had unraveled so thoroughly. Harrison felt nothing when he looked at her, not anger, not satisfaction, not heartbreak. He had expected to feel something sharp and painful, but what washed over him was simply a quiet, almost gentle detachment. He had mourned the betrayal months ago. Now there was nothing left between them but truth and consequence. Crystal's accomplice sat a few feet away, avoiding eye contact with everyone, especially Harrison. Their crimes were read aloud, their motivations laid bare, their intentions exposed in cold, methodical detail. Fraud. Conspiracy. Manipulation. Attempted corporate takeover. All of it laid out with clinical precision, leaving no room for doubt or excuses. The courtroom listened in tense silence as the prosecutor described how close they had come to destroying Harrison's company and future. But the moment that struck Harrison most wasn't the detailed breakdown of the crimes. It was the prosecutor's final line: this scheme would have succeeded if not for an unexpected witness, a child who saw what adults overlooked. Lily's small hand tightened around his, but her eyes never left the judge. When the judge announced the verdict, guilty on all counts, Crystal erupted in a mix of tears and fury, insisting she had been manipulated, insisting she had loved Harrison, insisting she deserved mercy. But her words no longer held power. The court ordered her into custody immediately, and as officers escorted her away, her gaze landed on Harrison one last time. Tears streaked her face, but Harrison didn't feel moved. It wasn't cruelty, it was clarity. She had chosen her actions. She was responsible for their consequences. After the hearing, reporters attempted to swarm them again, but Harrison shielded Lily and Anna, guiding them quietly out a side exit where fewer cameras lurked. They walked into a quiet courtyard shaded by tall trees, the sun filtering through the branches in soft beams. It felt like stepping out of a storm and into calm waters. Lily finally looked up at him, her eyes wide and bright. "Is it over now?" "It's over," Harrison said. "Completely." She seemed to take a moment to process this answer, her small shoulders relaxing as if she had been carrying some invisible burden. "Good," she said. "Bad people shouldn't get to win." He smiled softly at her conviction. They didn't. Lily opened her coloring book and sat on the nearest bench, swinging her legs as she flipped to a blank page. She began drawing with intense focus, her small tongue sticking out slightly in concentration. Harrison watched her for a moment, realizing how much she had changed his life in ways she didn't fully understand. She had reminded him that truth wasn't always loud, that sometimes it spoke in small voices, trembling hands, and simple courage. Anna exhaled beside him, the tension finally leaving her posture. "I don't know how we fit into all of this," she said quietly, "but thank you for letting us be here." "You fit into it because you were part of the beginning," Harrison replied. "You and Lily both." Anna smiled shyly, but Harrison could see the pride in her eyes as she watched her daughter draw. After a few minutes, Lily hopped off the bench and held up her newest creation. It was a drawing of three figures holding hands under a bright sun, one tall man in blue, a woman with brown hair, and a small girl in a red dress. Above them she had written, in uneven letters, "New Start." Harrison felt something warm and steady settle in his chest. Not the hollow ache of loss, not the sharp sting of betrayal, but something whole and hopeful. He crouched down to look at the drawing more closely. "Is this us?" he asked. Lily nodded as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "It's our beginning." The word struck him deeply, beginning. Not healing from something broken, not rebuilding from ruins, but beginning something new, something real. Something honest. He lifted her into a hug, feeling her small arms wrap around his neck with absolute trust. "Thank you," he whispered. "For what?" she asked, confused. "For telling the truth. For being brave. For changing everything." She leaned back just enough to look him in the eyes. "Anyone would have told you." "That's not true," he said. "Most people would have stayed silent. You didn't." She smiled with a kind of innocence that made the world feel lighter. I just didn't want you to marry someone mean. He laughed quietly, a sound full of relief and affection. Well, you definitely made sure of that. As they walked toward the exit of the courtyard, Lily swinging his hand and Anna carrying the drawing, Harrison felt a certainty settle into the core of his being. He had been given a second chance by the most unlikely person. A child had protected him when adults failed. A small voice had shattered a world built on lies and opened the path to a future grounded in truth. It wasn't a perfect fairy tale. It wasn't neatly wrapped. But it was honest. And in that honesty, Harrison found something better than the happy ending he had once imagined. He found a new beginning. A real one. Born from courage, truth, and the unexpected bond between a wounded man and a brave little girl who refused to look away.